Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Visiting Zen. So it's I think a little bit of a unique title, but hopefully the presentation is as unique as the title. Thank you all for coming. Just to give you a quick overview of how we're going to run this presentation, there's actually three presenters here today. So I'm going to give you a quick background on this project that we're going to be speaking about today. And then Drew Hubbell, our project architect, is going to come up and speak about sustainable design concepts. And then Rebecca Tasker is going to come up and talk about the green building and the straw-bale and clay plaster components. And then I'll come up at the end and talk about collaborative construction project management that we use. And then all three of us are going to come up at the end and share a philosophy statement that each of us would like to impart to the group. So our project is a project at the Deer Park Monastery, which is located in the foothills of Escondido. It's a nunnery project, so it's to house the nuns, the Buddhist nuns that live at this monastery. There's 4 structures that are going to house approximately 45 sisters when the project is done. The project incorporates sustainable design as well as green building techniques. This picture was actually taken on our cornerstone day, which is when the first bale of straw was placed into the building, and the sisters are there to ceremonially place the first bale of straw. The project itself is composed of 4 buildings. So these 3 buildings here are the residences for the nuns. They include bathroom and shower facilities as well as dormitories. And then this building here is for the Zen master when he visits the property. And then the courtyard here is a general meeting area and gathering area for the sisters. So give you a quick time lapse of the project. This was right about a year ago in August when we poured the foundation. And then all of the framing that's done is a post and beam foundation or framing to allow for the straw bales. This is in about November of last year. And then this is about January. You can see that all the straw bale now has been placed into the structures. This first building here has been plastered. And the next shot, this is about March of this year when all of the buildings are plastered. And then this was actually just taken a few weeks ago, and we're starting to work now in the courtyard area of the project. Let me tell you a little bit about Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. Probably next to the Dalai Lama, I would say he's the most well-known living Buddhist in the world. And we saw a picture earlier of the Pope. I actually saw something recently that kind of ranked the world's top leading spiritual figures. And the Dalai Lama was first, the Pope was second, and Thich Nhat Hanh was third. So Thich Nhat Hanh is a global spiritual leader, poet, and peace activist. And he actually came to prominence in his early 30s when he was living in Vietnam, and he was protesting the Vietnam War. And as a result of that, he was actually nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967. Thich Nhat Hanh founded Deer Park Monastery in 2000. So Thich Nhat Hanh, he was actually exiled from Vietnam because of his work with the peace movement. And so he took refuge and lives in a monastery in France now. And but he has, over the last 15 years or so, founded 3 different monasteries in the U.S. One is in New York, one's in Mississippi, and then we have the Deer Park Monastery that was founded in 2000 in Escondido. Thich Nhat Hanh's main teaching deals with mindfulness and with really being present in the present moment. And his philosophy is that through mindfulness we can learn to be happy in the present moment. And that's what we really need to be able to achieve peace, both in ourselves as well as in society. So I want to talk about the Zen perspective and how that applies not only to our project, but I think you'll see as we talk about it, how it really is just a natural fit for the perspective of sustainability. So early on when we were talking about the design of the project, one of the monastics said to me, you know, when we measure our impact, we think in terms of generations, not years. And our community extends well beyond the monastery or even the city of San Diego. So that's a wonderful context in which to apply sustainability. You know, again, we saw Doug show the slide this morning of the cost of a building, and I loved how it had a 30-year chart. You know, most time when you look at the cost of buildings and construction, you don't have a 30-year time frame. The monastics here, you know, that's a short time frame for them. I mean, they think in terms of generations and centuries. And so when they look at the cost impact of what it was going to cost to build these buildings, they really didn't look at just the year or two to build them or even a 5 or 10-year period. They were looking at a much broader and longer period. And then secondly, they look at the impact, not just on how it's going to affect them there at the monastery or even within San Diego, but how it's going to affect the whole region and really even not even just the nation, but the entire world. So when we looked at where we were bringing materials in for the project and things like that, we really took very much of a global perspective. And so when you have a long-term perspective and a very global perspective, the ideas of sustainability and sustainable design and green building are just a natural outgrowth of that. So 3 particular concepts that I want to introduce you to, for those of you that aren't familiar with mindfulness. The first one is really the cornerstone of Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, and it's the concept of inner being. And the concept of inner being is that all of us are all interrelated. Everything is connected, and what's part of one is part of everything. Thich Nhat Hanh tells this great story of when you mindfully drink your tea and you look into your tea, you should be able to see a rain cloud in your tea. And the reason is because you know, water starts in the clouds in the sky, come to the earth in the form of rain that waters crops, that grows the tea leaves, that ultimately then becomes the water that ends up in the teacup. And a cloud is never destroyed. A cloud just changes forms. It changes forms from a cloud to water to earth, and then in some days returns to a cloud. So it's the concept that all of us are related and everything is connected. The second concept is the concept of mindful consumption. And when we talk about consumption, consumption isn't just the food that we put into our mouth, but it's really how we are paying attention and present to everything that we consume. What we read, what we say, what we think, the materials that we use in our day-to-day lives. And so we applied that same mindfulness concept to the building materials that we chose for the monastery as well. And then the third mindful concept is that concept of mindful communication. Really being present when you're having a conversation with someone, listening deeply and speaking honestly, but also compassionately. And that's something that we incorporated into the construction management that we used for the monastery project. So I want to give you a little bit of a background on our 3 presenters today. As I mentioned earlier, Drew Hubbell is our project architect. And Drew has a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Arizona. And he had a very eclectic upbringing, which he's going to share a little bit of that with you today. But after he got his degree, he actually headed off to Europe and he studied architectural program at the Danish Institute in Copenhagen. And then he came back to San Diego, and for 6 years he was a project architect with Milford, Wayne, and Donaldson down in the gas line. And worked a lot on adaptive reuse and historic preservation. So that really got him to develop an appreciation for the building materials. And then 20 years ago, he founded Hubbell & Hubbell, which is an architecture firm that he formed with his father, James Hubbell, who many of you may know. He's a very well-known artist in San Diego. And their specialty is in using alternate building materials in San Diego. Drew also sits on the board of directors for several nonprofits, including the Elin Leal Foundation, which is founded by his father. The Cowles Mountain Foundation, Mid-City Little League. Drew and I share a passion for Little League. and the Citizens Coordinate for Century 3. And I also want to note that last year, Hubbell & Hubbell was actually selected and awarded the AIA Award for the Energy Efficient Home of the Year. Our straw-bale builder is Rebecca Tasker. Rebecca Tasker is a general contractor and co-owner of Simple Constructs. And I love the story that Rebecca tells about her background. She actually had a BFA in sculpture from New York College of Ceramics, and then she ran an art gallery in Boston. And one day she woke up and realized that in managing this art gallery that she wasn't making anything anymore. And that was her whole passion in life, was to make something. So she actually hopped coasts and came out to the West Coast and started working in construction. And right away she was struck with the amount of waste that's used in construction, how much is thrown away, and the toxicity of the typical materials that are used in construction. And one day she saw one of Drew's straw-bale buildings, and that was it. She fell in love with straw-bale, and she could see where her new passion was and where her new interest was. And so she started studying building science, and she realized that although these are very simple materials, straw and clay, they're actually amazingly sophisticated and are quite sophisticated and quite high-tech in their performance from a building standpoint. So she found her mentor. She studied plasters with the Steens. She did Adobe restoration with Pat Taylor. She earned her BA and EP science certifications, and she's a board member for the California Straw-bale Building Association. My name is Ed Earl. I am the principal of a construction project management firm here called Priority One Projects. I've been in the construction industry for about 25 years, and I have an MBA from Stanford. For about the last 15 years, I've been an owner's rep. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, what I do is I'm hired by homeowners that are either building custom homes or doing high-end remodels to manage the whole process. So I'm the person that advocates for the owner and integrates and communicates between the architect and the builder and the interior designer and all of the parties that are involved. And to be honest, actually, I kind of got a little disillusioned in my role of doing that and kind of building these giant monstrosities for people. And so about a year and a half ago, I started kind of broadening my perspective. I had the fortunate circumstance to be able to get involved in the monastery project, also working on a safari camp rebuild in Botswana. So kind of broadening my perspective, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later in my presentation. I have actually been a practitioner of Buddhism for about 20 years. I went on my first retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh 18 years ago. But for me, it was always separate from my career. You know, I always practiced mindfulness and I tried to live it as best I could in my daily life. But as being a construction project manager, I felt like that was kind of separate. And the miracle for me of what's happened with this project is that it's allowed me to really apply my mindfulness concepts to my profession. And it is actually as a result of that that I created this concept called collaborative construction, which is a construction management system that I use, not just at the monastery, but in all of my projects. So, and I also have two other businesses. I also do commercial property management, and then I'm also actually a business coach for contractors here locally, for contractors that are looking to improve their business and make their business more enjoyable as well as more profitable. So I'm going to turn it over to Drew now, and Drew's going to talk to us about sustainable design.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My portion of the presentation is going to talk about the design part of the monastery at Deer Park, and then I'm going to weave in a couple of our other sustainable projects and building materials that we've been able to use and develop through the county over the years. So Ed referenced my parents' home. This is a house up in Julian. I don't know if any of you have been there, but we turned it into a foundation. And I bring it up because you saw my father in the first slide. He was hanging on pipe roofs and with spray concrete. That's one of his favorite building materials. But I grew up building from about the age 4, And some of the materials you see in this slide are adobe block. There used to be an adobe factory in Escondido when I was growing up, and they would give my father all the seconds, or the broken blocks, for free if we hauled them away. There was also a stone from the site that we gathered in building parties, and then the tile on the roof was made in Tecate, Mexico. He flipped it over backwards from the traditional way. So a very creative upbringing for me. And then Deer Park Monastery, this is the sign that you see when you first walk up to the site. I have arrived, I am home. So Thich Nhat Hanh, Ed mentioned briefly, he's written over 80 books on Buddhism, and wonderful teacher. And so if you want to get more into it, there's lots of material to read about him. Our client, so they interviewed a few architects from what they had learned, and this was our client. It was the nuns of the monastery. Beautiful, wonderful, peaceful people. The interview, I think why they selected us is because we talked about things more than the building and the technical part, and we were able to weave in stories, and I knew we had touched them when I saw a couple of tears in some of the nuns' eyes. And you don't get a lot of clients, or we don't have a lot of clients that are like that. You know, a lot of it's business and how much does it cost. So Ed mentioned the site a little bit. Sorry about that. Here's the compound. We designed it around a courtyard. And some of the features that we tried to integrate into the plan were sensitive to the site. So using the existing, it was built where there was a residence before, so we weren't disturbing the native land. Passive solar design, so we're using the heat and to cool and to shade in the summertime, reducing the mechanical and electrical needs of the site. A narrow footprint. Here's the floor plan again. So the rooms and the spaces aren't very wide, so the sun and the natural ventilation go through. And one of the things we tried to do was be respectful of nature. Albert Einstein wrote, "Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better." A few of the other features: indoor-outdoor living. The spaces integrate a breezeway, so when the nuns in these dormitories, they go outside to the bathrooms and showers, they're protected. They're in the outdoors and in the beautiful courtyard, but there's a connection to the land that they live on. This is our project team, and I wanted to recognize Alex Miller. He's here photographing. He's an architect he's a project architect for this project. And then you'll see Ed and Rebecca and Mike, part of the team here, the contractor. And then the sisters and some of the volunteers. One of the wonderful parts of Straw-bale and some of the building we get to work on is the bale raising party. This was a little bit bigger because it's a pretty big project, but on a residence, we'll have a bale raising, and you might get all the bales up or most of them in a weekend. And I related to an Amish barn raising, where community members come together, they help put up a building. And for example, in the Friends Center, we have people come back and they'll say, "This is my section of wall." They're really excited. They have nothing to do with the project. They might be in the neighborhood or a friend of theirs, but they get excited about it. So these are some images and they used rice straw because rice has a connection with their Buddhism and the Vietnamese community, so it was brought down from Northern California, and it's a waste byproduct of production of rice. And there's a couple of the nuns. The bales weigh about 50 to 60 pounds, so two people, pretty easy for them to lift. So two of the smaller nuns are lifting it and stacking the bales during the bale raising. What would you guys do if you were your first interview with a client walking around the site and you were talking to them while you're walking and they never responded? Well, this happened to me on my first meeting with the abbot there. And he actually was an architect trained at USC and moved on after that. But pretty soon I realized, well, maybe I shouldn't speak so much and just listen. But then later I learned that when we stopped, he would speak. So part of their meditation at Deer Park is the process of walking and being quiet and peaceful as you walk, because that's part of the meditation. So one of those little lessons of being aware of your surroundings, learning from the site, but also being aware of your client. This is a photograph from one of the paths at Deer Park from up above. And so, as Ed showed some of the construction photos, this was during the roofing stage. We used a standing seam metal roof. So this is Thich Nhat Hanh's house and the courtyard. And one of the elements that was unique is he wanted to save these 4 cypress. And we're saying those are fire hazard. The building has to move. But they were really a spirit to the land for him. So we were able to maintain those. This is a shot of the construction, and one of the nice elements of this, all the breezeway members are reclaimed lumber out of a place in Temecula that sells them. So we were able to use the bales, which are reclaimed or recycled material, and then the wood was also where we could. And there's a close-up of it. Some of the goals we developed at Deer Park were blending in with the site, functionality, and the simplicity. So we were trying to take Thich Nhat Hanh's lessons of simplicity and listening and build on those. So using sustainable and natural materials, energy efficiency, and then engagement of using the reclaimed and using people from the community to help build the property. And then a tradition in Straw-bale is a truth window. So John Ruskin, who was one of the founders of the arts and crafts movement, he wrote, when love and skill work together, expect a masterpiece. So Rebecca and Mike, if you get to see a earth and plaster, especially their work, it's really a piece of artwork. And when I walk up to these walls, I just want to touch them. They're just a different feel than drywall. And then one of the importance of design in our world, and before I get into the alternative materials, is the spaces that we design really affect people. So Frank Lloyd Wright wrote, whether people are fully conscious of it or not, they actually derive consonance and sustenance from the atmosphere of things they live in or with. So a few of the other projects I'll just touch on briefly are the Friends Center. Doug mentioned about Ridge Haven being the first LEED project, but this was actually when they just started LEED about 15 years ago, I think. This was their test model project before they had developed it. So very green project, went through the city of San Diego. Straw-bale, recycled metal studs, very energy efficient, natural daylight. And so they used it as a test for their for the LEED workshops. This is again the bale raising workshop. Volunteers putting up the bales. This was about a 7,000 square foot Quaker church right near downtown San Diego. There's a shot of it finished. Central intro courtyard, sort of a Spanish tradition, where people come and meet before the church, and then they go into the circular meeting hall. And then I believe that art and beauty, I don't know if any of you saw there's a Walt Disney special on PBS this last week, but he talked about how art and nature were so important in all the movies that he created from Bambi on. And so I thought that was interesting. This was a watercolor that my dad did of a peace crane. And they have a tradition at Friends Center of, they have the children create origamis remembering the bombing of Japan. So this is a crane at their entry, symbolism. Insulated concrete forms are another material that we like a lot. This is recycled styrofoam from Sony production in Arizona. They mix it with concrete and then they have these forms. This is a site up at my parents' property up in Julian that we're building. And then this is a nature center, interpretive center in Elfin Forest that was designed using the insulated concrete forms. This has a living roof. And Doug also mentioned resiliency. This is a product, it's in a 100-year floodplain. So we designed it so the walls and doors could be blown out in a flood, but the styrofoam walls would still remain. And it's also very resistant for fire. And I think actually Doug's office, when he was back at Lincoln Scott, they worked with us on a passive cooling system for that project. It wasn't installed because we decided it wasn't needed in our climate. And then another material that I like a lot is adobe block. This was a ranchero from the 1890s that burned in the cedar fires. And they couldn't find anybody locally that had worked with adobe. So we helped restore 4 of the buildings there that were adobe. This one was done very far East County, done without permits about 4 years ago. Don't tell anybody. These are some of the structures. This was an old sleeping quarters for the bunkhouse. This was the main house, a little guest casita, and then another one. And they're all centered around a courtyard. That's an interior shot of the dining room and kitchen. And then we also incorporated a truth window. So we plastered over it to solidify it for seismic, but we wanted to leave some of it exposed just because of the beauty and so people believed it was adobe block. Then we've also recently used adobe with permits in Rancho Santa Fe on a veneer. They had a Weir Brothers house, and we used the veneer, which you can buy locally. And then one of the projects I'm very excited about, we were able to permit the load bearing through the county with an adobe structure in Ramona area. So these adobes are 2 wides thick, and then they have a 2-inch core. We worked with an engineer from the Bay Area. So first time in 20 years that they've allowed adobe, rather not just an infill, but to be the actual structural system. So we think it opens up a door for that use of a traditional material. These blocks are all made in Tecate, Mexico, and shipped across. And then I'll finish on just a couple of, one house that we did in Borrego. This is also a Straw-bale, and this is called the Smoke Tree Ranch. It's for sale if anybody's interested. But finish with a quote from my father. I sometimes wonder that the lowly snails and their shells have such magnificent homes, while we with our souls so often relegate ourselves to slums and boxes. Surely our homes should attempt to rival the best of our souls have to offer. It does not seem inconsistent to expect men to live in cathedrals. This was he collected Ferraris, the owner, so this is an underground garage, but it's a wonderful passive solar storage for the house. So we opened that garage door, brings the cool air up, and we were able to do a glass bottom pool, so the light in that space, actually the resort down there, Rams Hill, bought this property for a little while, and they were going to put their massage spa because it's such a wonderful garage. And then I wanted to end, this is a reflection through one of my dad's designs, stained glass back on the vaulted roof, and a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. A river must be calm in order to reflect the full moon. Thank you.
So if anybody can't hear me, just you put your hand up and I'll speak a little bit louder. I'm used to shouting on job sites, so I can project if I need to. So most of us in this room have spent a lot of time thinking about the impacts that construction can have on the environment. But we also know that people outside this room haven't spent so much time. For a lot of people, a building is just something you walk into, and it's built however that is because it's just how you build buildings. But luckily for the sisters at Deer Park, every decision that they make is considered deeply and broadly. The idea of interbeing, that all things are connected, really focuses our attention on the consequences of our decisions. So as the sisters considered building, their process of mindfulness generated wide-reaching questions, which for me get right to the heart of sustainability. And they sort of fall into three categories. As we think about how we want to build, what will have the least negative environmental impacts? What will make the most effective building? And then this last one may not be asked consciously, but it's definitely a driver in our decisions. What is appealing? Right button. So let's look at the impacts. Straw is left over from the production of grain, as Drew mentioned. No one's growing a crop just to create straw bales. You know, they're being grown for the grain is harvested, and then the stalks are bundled together into bales. And there's a lot of straw being produced in California. It's an abundant agricultural byproduct, and there aren't a lot of other uses for it. So to be able to use a straw bale as a building material is actually a great example of upcycling. Unlike trees, straw is an annual crop. And straw can be sourced locally, although we did bring bales down from Northern California for the monastery. Most of the bales that we buy come from less than 100 miles away. So if you consider the carbon footprint of a bale, other than the energy it takes to bundle up those leftover stems and deliver that bale to your job site, all of the other resources needed to create that bale were used for the production of food. The California Straw Building Association is currently studying just how much carbon a straw bale wall can sequester. You probably know this: as plants grow, they draw carbon out of the air and they lock it up, and that carbon is not re-released until the plant decomposes. So by keeping the straw intact in the wall, that carbon is not re-released into the atmosphere. A plastered straw bale wall replaces the insulation, the paint, and the drywall. It can reduce the amount of lumber needed for framing. Any leftover straw can be chopped up and used as fiber in the plasters. And then any waste straw can be recycled as mulch on the site without any further processing. And then at the end of its life cycle, a clay plastered straw bale wall is biodegradable. So the natural plasters, particularly clay plaster, have lower negative environmental impacts. Clay is another very abundant material. If you took all the clay on Earth and spread it evenly around the planet, you would have a layer more than a mile thick. And you can find it just about everywhere. And unlike cement, which we all know uses a huge amount of energy to be processed, clay needs very little energy for processing, so it has low embodied energy. And I'm really excited that our industry is finally paying attention to embodied energy with metrics like Living Building Challenge and LEED4. We're finally realizing that the meter doesn't start when the building is built, that the energy that went into making that building really matters. So these natural abundant materials with low embodied energy take a smaller toll on our natural resources and have fewer negative impacts. So then we get to the next question: what will make the most effective building? And the building with the lightest possible carbon footprint would be probably something like a tent. But a tent might not be the most effective building to keep us safe and shelter us. Straw-bale buildings are very effective buildings. So let me tell you a little bit about the building science to prove it. part that I get really excited about, because everybody knows that Straw-bale building is green and natural, but few people know just how high-tech it is. Straw-bale walls are super insulated. They have a high R value. For anyone that doesn't know, R value is a way of measuring a material's ability to resist the flow of heat. So it's nice and cool in here, it's hot outside, that heat is trying to come through the wall. How long will that take before that heat disrupts our nice cool room? Well, the higher the R value of the wall, the longer that process will take. The widely accepted rating for straw bales is R 1.45 per inch, and bales are at least 18 inches thick, usually 24 inches thick here the way we build. The CEC, who determine what we can claim on the Title 24 energy counts, they rate a straw bale wall as R30. So if you ask your local energy specialist about an R30 wall, they'll probably tell you it's just about perfect for our climate. Super insulated, but not too much insulation. Thermal bridging. Thermal bridging is what happens when you have a relatively non-insulating material like wood that interrupts the insulation layer and allows that heat to pass through the wall faster. Because straw-bale walls are so thick, there really isn't much that penetrates from one side of the wall to the other. The framing is usually to one side, maybe 6 inches deep into the bales. Things like electrical boxes only penetrate maybe 4 inches. There just isn't anything going through the wall, so there's much less thermal bridging. And because plastered straw-bale walls have fewer seams or edges than, say, sheets of plywood, they can be much more airtight. There can be less air leakage. So with careful detailing, straw-bale walls can and have reached passive house standards of airtightness. Of course, if dealing with any kind of tight building envelope, you have to consider then where you're getting your fresh air with natural or mechanical ventilation. Thermal mass is a material's ability to store heat. So if we imagine a rock that's been sitting in the sun all day, when the sun goes down and the air temperature drops, that rock stays warm. Or a tile floor that stays cool as the day heats up. That's because air has very little thermal mass, but the rock and the tile have a lot. The plasters on straw-bale walls are about 1 inch thick, so they provide good thermal mass. And that's slowing the transfer of heat through the wall. And then it's also slowing changes in heat, in temperature, so that a warm room will stay warm longer. And ductility is a fancy word for flexibility. Because the bales and the plasters are more flexible, they have ductility. They do well in earthquakes. They can bend a little bit without breaking. Plastered straw-bale walls have a high fire resistance rating. It's 1 hour for clay plaster and 2 hours for lime cement, which is what we used on the monastery. If you imagine that bales are so thick and dense, it's like trying to burn a phone book. There just isn't enough available oxygen for combustion. So they just smolder, which saves you a long time to get out of the building before that wall is compromised. And straw-bale walls provide good sound insulation. They're STC 50 decibels, so they block 50 decibels of sound. The Friends Center that you mentioned is right next to a busy freeway, and it's a little much when you're outside and you walk inside and it's quiet and beautiful. And then on the interior, softer natural plasters like clay plaster don't bounce sound as much, so they create a pleasant interior sound quality. All right, this is the stuff I get really excited about, and I have to make sure I don't nerd out too much and go over my 15 minutes, but I just have to tell you how amazing it is the way straw-bale walls deal with vapor. So straw-bale walls are vapor permeable, and that means that although they don't allow air or liquid to pass through them, they do allow water vapor to pass through. And why is that important? Because people are damp. A family of 4 can produce as much as 2 gallons of moisture a day from breathing, cooking, showering. And people live in buildings, so we have to deal with this moisture. If we choose a system that traps that moisture, that's how we get moldy, sick buildings. If we choose a building system that can't passively deal with that moisture, that's when we have to throw a lot of technology at the problem to make sure that moisture is being mechanically vented. So the old adage about moisture was that buildings have to breathe, but that's a little misleading because breathing entails air moving in and out, and we definitely don't want air leakage. So it's more accurate to say that buildings need to transpire, which is the nice way of saying they need to sweat. So just like our skin, straw-bale walls allow moisture to pass through without allowing air. And high brick mass, there's maybe one or two people in the room that will get excited with me on this one, so I'll be quick. But high brick mass is thermal mass, but for moisture. So clay plaster has the ability to draw excess humidity out of the air and safely store it. And when the air dries out again, it releases that humidity. So it's mitigating spikes in humidity, making people feel more comfortable, and again, further reducing the possibility of condensation and mold. So you can see how using non-toxic, zero VOC materials that don't trap moisture, that reduce the risk of mold, and that balance humidity lead to better indoor air quality. You're probably starting to wonder where's the people part of this, so we'll move on from the building science. And we get to the last question, which is less tangible. What is appealing? What do I like? And again, this question might not be consciously asked, but it definitely informs our choices. So whether it's a hobbity round building or a normal straight building, when you start to put straw bales into a wall, people notice, wow, that's different. But once they've had a few questions answered, usually those questions are about the three little pigs, but once they've had their questions answered, most people really get it. That makes sense. I could do that. And as Ed mentioned in my bio, years ago when I was searching for a better way to build, I saw this picture of one of Drew's buildings, and I was awestruck with the simplicity. So you go to the field, you get bales, you stack them up, and you have a building. I've since realized it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that charisma, that direct appeal remains. And because these materials are fun and non-toxic, there is that tradition of involving friends and family and community in these bale-raising work parties. And this opportunity was particularly appealing to the sisters because of their large community and because of their tradition of engaged Buddhism. They regularly have work parties where the community members come and help take care of the monastery. It's part of the practice. So having events like the Straw-bale work parties, that allowed members of the community to directly participate in building new homes for the sisters. And that generated a lot of excitement about the project, which really helped with their fundraising. I don't think it's been mentioned, but this entire project was built with donated funds. Work parties don't make sense on every project, but they were a perfect fit on this project. These materials, particularly clay plaster, they're easily changed and repaired. On every project that we do, we teach the homeowners how to repair dings and scuffs on their walls. Sometimes we teach them how to add sculptural details like this cornerstone that has the family's handprints in it. And clay plaster is a softer material than many conventional finishes, but I like to say that its softness is its strength because it can be refreshed and repaired indefinitely. Most people feel pretty alienated from construction, from being able to build things, so to be able to give the homeowners this level of engagement in their buildings is really empowering, and it gets them asking, what else can I do? It's sort of a foot in the door to further engagement. And this leads to a feeling of commitment, of stewardship and care for that building. So we looked at the ways in which straw-bale buildings have fewer negative impacts on the environment and how these materials create a really surprisingly effective building system and how people respond to that charismatic process. The Deer Park project really highlighted the value of that third point to me. Because we can and we have created all kinds of efficient buildings, but if people don't care, if they don't love the building and want to keep it, it won't last. There can be no true sustainability without durability and longevity. And getting people to care and to become stewards of buildings that they love is a crucial and often overlooked part. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
All right, so we've heard about the design and sustainability in design. We've heard about sustainability in materials. And for most projects, that's kind of where sustainability stops or starts. But in my role as a construction project manager, I wanted to be able to incorporate these concepts of mindfulness into the construction management part of this project. And what I did in the process of doing that was to discover a whole new way of looking at construction management. So again, if we can expand our concept of sustainability beyond the products to include the process, I think we can actually get a larger value of sustainability by looking at it through this broader perspective, and again incorporating it into the process of construction itself. So what is collaborative construction? Well, collaborative construction is, as I said, it's a unique approach to construction project management. And it incorporates concepts like trust, open communication, shared objectives, lasting relationships. Those are words that you don't usually hear discussed when people are talking about managing construction projects. And as I said, it really focuses on the process of construction. But what I believe is that by focusing on the process, it will also alter the product that is ultimately constructed as well. So one of the ways to understand collaborative construction is to understand what it's not. And so I like to contrast it with traditional construction, which is really what I call the old school construction. You know, it's things like sealed bids, you know, and when contractors submit their bids, all the bids are sealed, and the owner feels like they have to get 3 or 4 bids to make sure that they're getting the best price or the best scope of work. So there's just an inherent lack of openness and a lack of trust in this more traditional form of construction. In collaborative construction, it's all based on open communication. So this is a picture of one of our site meetings that we have weekly at the monastery. And everyone sits in a circle, everyone contributes. There's not one person speaking and the rest of them listening. It's a very integrative and collaborative process. And so what I do in my projects is to really set it up in such a way so that everyone feels like they have a voice in the project. So all the way down to the laborers that are working on the project themselves. If they can find a better way to do something, they're empowered with a voice to be able to communicate that. So again, going back to the competitive style of construction, you know, I compare that, it's kind of like a military operation, right? You know, the architect like draws the plans and they pass it on to the general contractor, and the contractor puts his stuff together and sends it out to the subcontractors, and they have their marching orders, and you know, it's all very linear, and there's a really kind of strict chain of command there, right? If one of the contractor finds some information that he needs, he has to go back to the architect has to do an RFI, and it's this very structured a system. And when I looked at that, I said, you know, why is it designed that way? And I think, you know, what they're trying to do is limit each person's responsibility to certain aspects of the project. And they're doing that to try to eliminate and avoid conflict. But what I think happens at the end, because you have each person in their own little silos, that there's this, you're missing this collaborative function. There's no trust between the parties. And I think you end up with a product that's not really as good as it can be. So one of the benefits of collaborative construction is really that it eliminates this conflict. Because, you know, I think in traditional construction, everyone has their own things that they're trying to protect. You know, the architect's created this beautiful design, and his goal is to protect that design. And then the contractor, you know, he's put a price to that project, and his whole goal is to protect his budget and make sure that he can build it for that price. Meanwhile, the owner has their concept of what they're trying to create in their project, and so they're trying to preserve that. And collaborative construction allows for this more interactive process, and so you have more creative problem solving, as I mentioned earlier. We've had situations where people in the field
have come up with ideas, or hey, what if we do things this way, or how about if we approach it that way? And because we empower people to have that voice, it allows changes to be made along the way. And I think as a result of that interaction, everyone feels like they're part of a team. And so everyone realizes that we're all working together, and when something goes wrong, there's no longer this finger pointing about who can we blame. It's more about, okay, hey, let's all work together and have a creative problem-solving process. Another key component of collaborative construction is trust and cooperation. So you have to build a strong team from the beginning. And what I do is really work to make sure that we can build that team as best as we can. This is a great picture of Rebecca's partner, Mike, who is also an owner of Simple Construct. And Mike's there on the left-hand side there with 3 of the plasterers for the project. And you know, as you can tell, Mike's just as dirty as they are. He's not there telling them what to do, he's showing them how to do it, and he's working with them hand in hand. And that's a perfect example of collaborative construction. So, as I said, collaborative construction really can stimulate creativity and ingenuity. It allows for more effective problem solving. Integrative design is a concept that's now being talked about quite a bit when we talk about sustainable projects. And integrative design is a start. It's definitely something that I do in collaborative construction, but it's really just a start. Definitely in the design process, I always encourage my clients to hire the architect at the same time as the contractor so that they can work together collaboratively in developing the design and the cost. But then collaborative construction goes much further than that because we want those same parties involved throughout the entire project. Shared values and objectives, another really key thing in collaborative construction. For this project in particular, it was obviously critical, and it was very important that we all understood what the values and objectives were of our clients. As Drew mentioned, it was a little bit of a different and unique clients for us, but it was really important for me to be able, because I was more familiar with the tradition and with the concepts, to be able to share those with the building team. And so I've been sending out updates along the way. Thich Nhat Hanh had a stroke recently, and so I've been sending updates on his health, and as well as some information about the concepts of the project. And I think that really helps to build that collaborative process as well. So it also has a broader cost perspective. This is something I touched on earlier. You know, when they look at the cost of a project, they're not just looking at it over the term of the project, but they're looking at it in terms of generations and decades. And also looking at what the impact is well beyond the walls of the monastery. So, you know, what's the cost impacts of the construction well beyond what's in the monastery. So how do you implement collaborative construction? The key thing for me is communication. Communication is the central cornerstone of collaborative construction. And fortunately, we live in a world today where there's lots of different ways to communicate. I'm huge on email, and I use the CC all the time. I always CC groups of people. Mike and Rebecca can attest, as well as Drew, that I believe that it's a great way to keep everyone involved, to keep everyone in the process. And I encourage people to reply as well and make sure that everyone stays in the group. And yes, it does take some more time. It's going to put a few more emails into your inbox, but I think that it allows everyone to feel like they're more engaged in part of the project. Love them or hate them, I use group text as well. You know, some people don't like to be part of a group text, but particularly in a construction standpoint where there's, you know, not a lot of people that are able to check emails all the time, I'll use a group text to be able to communicate with groups and work with them together. Another system that I use is a cloud-based construction management system. So this is something that I discovered about a year ago. We use it not only at Deer Park, but I've used it on all of my projects. And what it does is it allows all of the team to participate together, to be connected. This is a cloud-based system that people can access on their smartphones, on their iPads, or on their desktop computers. This is a shot of an actual system that I use. It's created by Buildertrend, a group out of Nebraska, which they've customized for me. But literally every aspect of this project is coordinated on here. All of the bids are on there, the budgets are constantly updated in real time, as well as the schedules, so that anytime someone goes and checks this, whether it's a building owner, the clients, the contractor, myself, or any of the subs, all of the information is current and up to date. The schedules, the plans, it has a way to be able to track all the email messages, so if you ever want to go back and find out what some decisions that were made or things that were decided in emails, finish selections, daily updates. This is a section here where the contractor takes pictures and posts updates of whatever the daily progress is. Change orders, punch lists, they're all communicated here. I think that in another 4 or 5 years, it's going to be a requirement for every project that goes on. We're going to have a cloud-based construction management system. So what I found along the way, while I was really utilizing collaborative construction as an extension of the mindfulness concepts that I had learned in working with Thich Nhat Hanh in the Deer Park Monastery, what I've realized is that I think collaborative construction is a perfect fit for clients that value sustainability. You know, a client that is interested in sustainability, they usually have a broader perspective on things. They are not just looking at the hard costs, but they really want to look at what the cost impacts are of the whole project. And I don't think you can do that without also including the costs and the impacts of what it costs to build the project. And I think that if you are concerned about the impact that your building will have on the environment and the people that live in it, you should also be concerned about the impact that that building will have on the people that are actually constructing it. And do they feel like they're really part of the process? Do they feel like their voice is heard? Do they feel like they're building a structure that's actually going to be meaningful and be important? And I think in a collaborative construction process, all of that is contributed and really contributes to the sustainability as well as the design and the products that are used. So, all right, I'm going to bring Drew and Rebecca back up, and we're going to talk a little bit about our quick leave you with a couple of philosophies that we. So, let's see if we can. We've got kind of a late start here too, so. Go ahead, you first.
Is it on there?
Yeah.
So my philosophy, I'll just read through it. Like a beautiful piece of music, our architecture strives to take you to a place you may not otherwise have gone, a place of jubilation. It's also founded on respect. First, materials in the broadest sense, including where we come from and how they are processed and what they come from, similar to the Straw-bale and the earth and plaster we've been talking on this project. It's my view the necessity that humans need to begin to practice sustainability in our everyday lives. I've seen over the last 20 years the impact that waste and consumption has had on our world and global warming, just in our San Diego environment. And reducing the impact. So we strive to bring spirit to each project by connecting it to the land that it sits on. Observation is the key to this. Observing the best views, direction of breezes, the path the sun travels, the site, and the building becomes part of the site. Thank you.
So I'd like to leave you with the thought that as we start to ask questions, we generate more questions, and bringing mindfulness to how we impact the environment. You know, I kind of think of Straw-bale as a Trojan horse, that because it's so engaging and so charismatic, people get excited about it in a way that they don't about maybe an HRV or under slab insulation. So we have a way to get people engaged, and then once they start saying, well, if I could build this wall differently, what else can I do differently?
A lot of mindfulness is based on perception, and it's amazing what we can change when we change our perception. And a lot of what we learned in this project was by incorporating in what we learned from working with the monks and nuns at Deer Park Monastery, was changing our perspective. So, you know, by taking a more holistic view, we can see the broader value of sustainability. And I think back to something that happened when we first went into outer space and they sent that first picture back, how everyone in the world changed their thinking when they saw this perspective for the first time in the history of mankind. What we realized is that everything is connected. We are all a part of the whole. We are all defined as part of the larger whole, and what affects one affects all. This concept is the concept of inner being. And it's something that I think that we can apply not only in our lives, but as well in the buildings that we build in going into the future. Thank you. So one thing I want to mention is that the monastery is actually going to be on the Green Homes Tour on October 4th. So you are all welcome to come up and be able to see the buildings firsthand. We'd love to have you come up and join us for that. So couple of questions. We have time for a few questions if people have any questions.
Could you speak a little bit about how you see this type of construction growing into the public sector? For example, into public schools or government buildings? Is it possible to use in large multi-story, multi-use buildings, or are there limitations to your type of construction?
There's a lot of politics in building and materials, and Doug mentioned in the San Diego, the building component was difficult to change. So change takes time. We've had much more success in residential and smaller projects, but they have done we've done two-story straw-bale structures. So the technology is there because it's a post-beam construction. But I think in the broader picture, it's more about the green building and sustainability. And those materials are very easy to incorporate into public projects.
And if I may, there are also 5- and 7-story straw-bale buildings being constructed in Germany and other parts of the world. So we'll get there.
Yeah.
Can you just comment a little bit on the permit process and any other obstacles that there might be in getting this to have more of a broader, wider appeal?
So part of my background, coming from my dad's experience, was experimenting. And one of the lessons that I want to take on you is courage. Now, a lot of architects are afraid to, I had it in my blood and grew up in that, but a lot of architects are afraid to try something new. But we've broken the ground. We permitted over 25 in the county and 2 in the city of San Diego. And they've been permitted all over the U.S., almost every county in California, right? And straw bales are all over the world. France is a hotbed. So I think it just takes, we're happy to consult or help somebody who's trying to use an alternative material, but the door's open.
And it's really exciting because just this last year, the appendix for the Straw-bale Code that the California Straw Building Association had been working on for 10 years was accepted into the IRC. So in the next code cycle, it's there. There's really not many arguments anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, what's the life cycle? How long does the interior walls of the bale hold up? And the other part of my question is regarding remodeling, for example, when you go into that wall, how does that hurt or not hurt the interior structure of that?
I had the great joy of seeing a 100-year-old straw bale 2 years ago at the international conference. It had been taken out of a home in Nebraska that was over 100 years old, and it was perfect. It was completely intact.
No bugs?
Sorry?
No bugs?
No, there's nothing for bugs to eat. There's no grain. There's nothing for bugs to want to eat in there. They'll go through it to get to wood. Termites will. So we have track record of over 100 years. And looking at that bale, I would say that building has another 100 years. And that was a product of a renovation. They decided they actually wanted indoor plumbing in their historic house. So they opened up part of the wall, put in some framing to support that opening, and added on. So it's a very flexible system.
Yeah.
You said it's a byproduct, whether it's the rice and straw. Like, what in California? Do you have any idea of like how much, like if it's not being used to go into buildings, like how much of it's going to waste? I mean, is there absolutely abundant source?
Do you know that statistic?
I don't know exactly, but I know in Northern California, one of the reasons they were trying to permit more of it is because it's burned. So after the rice production, which doesn't make sense where we have water inefficiency, but then they're burning it to double the effect, you know. But in Brawley and Imperial County, it's wheat and barley which mostly produce it. So the byproduct is using it for straw in farms or barns or horses.
And I did hear one estimate, and it's, you know, fuzzy math, but that with all the straw produced in California, you could build every new home 10 times over and still have enough straw.
We have 1 minute left. Rodero?
Can you explain clay plaster? What is it made out of? And
Oh.
what's a binder?
Clay is the binder.
What is a
So
binder?
it's clay, sand, and some sort of fiber. We tend to use straw because we have a lot of it. So clay is a very strong binder. It also swells when it's hit with water, so it's somewhat self-sealing, and all the other great things.
So no cement?
No cement, no cement. Cement actually really interferes with clay as a binder.
So one more question, and we'll be up here to answer questions if you have. Who's
And besides me again, right? Okay, thickness of the walls, is there any difference in thickness of wall requirements when you're working with bale?
Oh, so generally the thinnest you can get with a bale wall is 16 inches.
Oh.
So, yeah, there's a significant
is quite-
amount of wall, which is probably one of the reasons why it's been harder for us to make real progress in the cities where square footage is at a premium. Most of our projects are really
Does take quite a bit.
It is.
And can I ask another part of that, or someone else has an answer?
there's one more behind
Can
you.
you speak to the cost analysis of this process and also your collaborative construction process? Are you saving costs in your integrated construction process? Do you have a number or figure to that as compared to typical
So
framing?
again, I think it depends on your perspective, you know.
On this
Collaborative
project.
construction definitely takes, you know, it's more costly in the short term because it can take longer to involve everyone. But if you look at a longer term perspective, and I think the same happens with the straw bale. Straw bale is about 15%, 10 to 15% more from a building cost standpoint.
Sure.
But again, if you look at Doug's view there of a 30-year cost of the building, it's actually the least expensive way to go to build.
Are you doing an analysis based on the typical framing costs?
Right.
Drywall,
Traditional
kitchen,
stud frame
paint,
construction.
all that extra effort compared to the offset by straw bale, insulation, and plaster.
Right.
And you have to, what you're comparing it to, apples, you have to compare it to another R30 wall.
Right.
And how much would it cost to build an R30 wall? You would have to probably do double studs or, you know, other forms that are generally more costly than straw bale. So compared to a crappy stick-built house, yeah, it's more expensive, but compared to the same thing, it's favorable.
Is that just materials or is labor included with that 10%?
Labor included.
Labor's included, so 10% for each.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.